Hello, and here we are on another sunny day at Kevock Garden Plants, just outside Edinburgh. My name's Graham Gunn and I'm manager at the nursery, and we're just about to show you another one of the projects we're doing at the nursery. And as you can see, this is our project. We love planting them for other people, so we thought we'd create one for ourselves. And if you haven't guessed already, our project this year is a rock garden. As you can see, it's a work in progress, but we're getting there. There's several stages when you do any rock garden. First of all is obviously choose the right site, aspect, etc. And then we start to lay the rocks, and that's the stage we've positioned them, and those are all completed. We then start to infill them with soil, level off the soil, and get the ground ready for planting. And as you can see, we now get down to the fun bit, the planting. So we've selected a nice few plants to go in this area, and all of them are, in a traditional sense, sort of sunny alpines. They like a really well-drained soil in full sun. And as you can see, we've also gone ahead and prepped the soil so it's got that. So most of this soil, up the top especially, has at least sort of 50% grit in it to help with drainage, because a lot of these plants grow in the mountains, in sort of rock crevices where there's lots of natural drainage, so they hate their roots wet. Some of the plants we're going to be planting today, the first one is this Pulsatilla. It's also known as the Pasch flower because it flowers at Easter time. It obviously was flowering at Easter, but it's still going now. These are lovely plants and very tolerable of a wide range of situations within the rock garden, but they do thrive best in full sun with good drainage. So this will be the first one we're planting, and obviously you need to dig your hole, tease out a few roots at the bottom, and then when we plant them, which might be different to the normal herbaceous border, but has to be very, very true in the rock garden and rockery, is they need to be planted nice and high. So a lot of these alpine plants grow in very rocky conditions and they hate their necks being wet. So you'll see when we come to the top dressing and the finishing of the grit at the end, when we top, we'll go back to that level. But for now, when we plant them, it's really important we don't plant them too deep. One of the other plants we're planting today is the Saxafarga, and this one here is Saxafarga crostata. You can start to see the little flower buds emerging deep down there now. And the amount of flower buds and the lots of the sort of different directions they're going, that gives you some sort of direction as to where to place that plant. And I think the placement of plants in rockery is something that's often sort of misunderstood as well, and that's very important. So you need to know the habit of each plant before you plant them. So because of this multiple directions, it's important that it's given somewhere to spread and won't sort of compete with other plants. So if we were to put that in the middle, as these flower buds come out and emerge, they would hit other plants. So when we plant these, also being a silver Saxafarga as well, it's important to add a little bit of lime to the soil because they grow on very natural limestone environments. So we just mix a little bit of that in. And we need to plant them somewhere where they're really going to shine, and you'll see those beautiful flower buds emerge, and you'll appreciate them as well. So we can just put that in that nice little crevice there. Another thing to try and remember when you're planting a rock garden is to try and keep similar plants that sort of like a similar habitat together. So those plants that like it a little bit gritty or a little bit wet or any of those sorts of conditions, try and keep those together. And that's key with this Primula auricula as well, which I'm sure many of you people know. With some of the other hybrids around, you often see them, and they were made very famous in the Victorian times as well. This is the wild species, Primula auricula, which is also known as the bear's ear, coming from the Latin for auricula, in resemblance to the shape of the leaf. And the key thing to remember with this one as well is it also likes very similar planting conditions to the Saxafarga. So it also would benefit from a little top dressing of lime, which we'll add into the soil before planting. And it also likes the same gritty soil. So we'll take this one out of its pot, and then we'll plant that one too. And again, obviously keeping it raised the same as the other ones. It's important to remember as well that not all alpines have to be planted in a sort of sunny, full sun, gritty soil as well. There's also lots of alpines that do well in those shady crevices. So when you're designing your rock garden as well, it's important to sort of bear those in mind and the sort of plants you want. So we've purposely created a lower part here, which will give us some shade for these plants that would do very well in it. We've spoken about the Saxafarga cristata, and the Saxafarga is a very wide family, grown in a wide range of habitats as well. This one is Saxafarga Clarence Elliott, ironically named after the superb rock garden builder who many of us would know as well. This one's also very pretty and grows very well in a damp, shady condition. So we'll plant that one just in here. As well as growing plants in the shade, there's also certain types of plants that are called sort of crevice or like a really gritty, well-drained soil as well, but they also grow in the shade, and that's because of their natural habitat growing on cliff edges. This one, it's got a great name. It's called Aquilegia Anemones. So this is very closely related to Aquilegias, which I'm sure a lot more of you will be be able to relate to than this. But this is a very unique plant, and we're planting this one for seed. So the key thing to remember when planting some of these is they almost need to go at 90 degrees to the rocks so that they really don't get any water in their roots, any water sitting on their roots. So we'll try and make a nice crevice for this one just down here, and we'll almost plant that one on its side. And here we have a Herbalia, which is part of the Gesneriad family. You most probably know another member of this family, the Streptocarpus. And as you can see, the flower buds are just beginning to emerge. They have a sort of lovely lilac-y purple flower in a few weeks when they emerge. And this one also it grows in Europe, but again it grows really in cliff edges on the sort of northeast side, where it gets a lot of moisture running through the roots, almost sort of trickling water, but it hates being sat in water. So again, with this one, it's really important we find that little crevice and we plant it at 90 degrees to the rocks, just like that, so that it can thrive. Once we've placed the plants in the soil and planted them, the next job is top dressing. Now this is all down to personal preference as well, but it's key that it ties in with your choice of stone, so that the two merge together. You don't obviously want a huge colour contrast between them. And you also don't want to go too big or too small. If you go too big, it looks like a path and it won't sort of have the natural effect. And if you go too small, then sort of leaves and pieces of soil and bark and things like that will start to accumulate in the grit, and that will cause problems. So the key thing is to choose the type of grit that you like, and also the right diameter of the gravel as well. You also want to make sure that the soil is level before we grit. So any sort of odd areas where it's sort of raised or anything like that, we want to make sure we get a nice flat base, and also to pull the gravel back away from the stones. And that's very important and is often not really carried out. But that key height there will help to keep the weed suppression down and to stop pieces of soil emerging through the gravel. When we go to place the gravel as well, we also want to make sure we carefully lift the plants and their sort of branches and their leaves, so we don't sort of catch them up in the gravel. And one of the best ways is just to make a couple of piles sort of on a nice big open area, and then you pull it up to the plant, each one at a time. And again, it's very important that the gravel goes back to the plant the same level it was in the pot. Ideally as well, we want to be going for a minimum of 5 centimetres of the gravel to stop weeds, for weed suppression really. It also helps with moisture retention in the summer, but one of the main reasons is weed suppression. And again, it's a lot better to do a smaller area to a greater depth than to try and spread it out too thinly over the whole rock garden. And we'll just finish this little area here now. And as we use grit on the sort of the full sun part of the rockery, when we get to the more shady parts, we often tend to use bark as a top dressing, just because in these sort of damper environments you tend to get more leaves accumulate, and that sort of damper environment, the grits just doesn't look quite right, and also it tends to accumulate a lot more sort of soil and debris around it, which will lead to sort of damaging of the plants and weeds encroaching in as well. So on these shadier areas we tend to use bark. And you can choose any bark you want, any size really. Again, don't go too small so that it will act as a weed sort of bed, but any bark placed around the plants in the shady area will do. So we've seen some of the plants in the rock garden for the sunny aspects, and we've seen some of them for the shady aspects. When you're planning and planting a rock garden, it really is important to bear in mind the whole structure, all of the different nooks and crannies and the different aspects, and how they play and read with each other as well. Whether that be the different colours, so you want to make sure that things flowering at the same time have a similar, they work well together as when they're flowering. Also things like leaf form and leaf structure. You don't want too many things with similar leaves next to each other. It's nice to have some sort of contrasty leaves, such as things emerging out of them like Libertias with their tall leaves, compared to some of the sort of, obviously the dainty Saxafargas as well. It's also important in a rock garden to try and create that year-round interest. A lot of alpine plants tend to flower in the spring, so it really is important you try and create that year-round interest in the rock garden. Whether that be with evergreens such as the Acephala or the penstemons or the salmisias, or even with sort of dwarf conifers and dwarf shrubs and trees as well. Another element not to forget in the rock garden is bulbs, such as this Muscari Valerie finis here. They're invaluable early in the year to provide that nice boost of colour we all need after the winter, and also in the autumn. Things like cyclamen hederifolium really do provide that beautiful colour in the autumn when there's not much else happening. So we appreciate not all of you would have a space as big as this in your garden, but hopefully we've inspired you just to try a little bit of it. Even whether it's in a trough, just on your balcony or anywhere really, there's always a space for some rock garden plants somewhere.